It is so good to have my longtime friend, Coach Tom Crean, join our Coach Me Up podcast. And Coach, I know you listen to us, but we always talk a little bit of ball in the beginning, and then we get into life, faith, heart stuff. So I just like to get your 30,000-foot view on college basketball. Here we are, wrapping up the end of non-conference, getting ready for conference play. Just kind of, where do you see us right now? I personally don't think we have that Gonzaga, Baylor that we had 2 years ago that we all knew those were the best two teams. I think there's a lot of really good ones out there. I would like to get your take on that to start with.
Well, I think it almost looks like, in the sense of where some of the top-ranked teams are right now, they have veterans. When you look at Purdue, when you look at UConn, when you look at Texas, Alabama, I know I'm missing Kansas. Right? Tennessee, absolutely. Kentucky, when you look at those teams, they have a really good blend of older players, some mixed in with transfer portal guys, but they have really good young players. The best teams right now have a really strong balance, and I think when you have that, you have a much greater opportunity to succeed later in the year because you're going to get better. If you have any type of work culture, if you have any type of player development program, and you have young players that are already contributing now and they stay hungry, you've got a chance to really, really expand your season and then potentially at some point maybe even explode, because some teams are going to they're going to drift off, right? They're going to practice, but not maybe with a purpose every day. They're going to win games, but they're not going to string successes together. And then in this day and age, you've got to constantly be aware of the locker room. You've got to constantly be aware of the surroundings because of NIL, because of so many new guys, because of the jealousies that can come up, because of all the different things that can get in your way that were always there, but now they're that much more because there's that much more change. So I don't think there's any one great team that you would say, okay, I'd put my money on this team no matter what. But I do think there's quite a few that have that opportunity, that if they can stay hungry and keep performing the way that they are and not get too down. The best thing is going to be, what are you going to be like after a 2-game losing streak, right? Like, what are you going to be? Because you're going to lose at home some night. You're going to lose a game on the road. Is it going to turn into a 3-game losing streak, or is it going to turn into a 1-game winning streak? And I think that's what's going to be the differentiator in a lot of teams as we get into January and February. And
what are you going to be like after a 4-game winning streak?
Oh, no question about that.
That tests you just as much sometimes, right?
Well, we're already seeing that. I mean, you're already seeing that. But I think there's going to be some lessons from football too. And I mean, if you look at some of the football teams that maybe were ranked high that struggled, there's probably a lot of different reasons. Injuries are the one reason that people never want to give the benefit of the doubt to, though, as everybody on this podcast knows, injuries are a real deal. And there's never such a thing as next man up if that next man is not as good or close to as good as the one that they're replacing. People think that's one of the great fallacies of sports. And it's nuts. And I think you've got that. But I think that it's not going to come down just to the strong head coaches. It's going to come down to the entire coaching staff, support staff that can keep these teams enveloped and keep them close and keep looking around corners, seeing around corners like General Colin Powell used to say. Where are the problems that haven't shown themselves yet, but they're right there because we can feel it, and how do we address it? I think locker room management, one-on-one management, meetings on the bus and the hotel, things like that, to keep people from being absorbed by the messages they're hearing from the outside are going to be paramount. And then that doesn't even include, guys, what's going to happen as we get closer to spring, which means we're closer to draft time.
Yeah.
And that is, and I've lived this. I mean, that can be as dangerous as anything that you're dealing with those last 6 weeks of the season when people start planning ahead. And what you've got to do ultimately is you've got to make sure that your players keep their bags unpacked. I mean, literally and figuratively. You just got to make sure that they stay with the most important thing being your team and their development. And it gives you a chance to make some memories when it's all said and done.
Tom, I went to Tennessee, and they dropped a game late that probably kept them out of the college football playoff. And you never quite know what's going on in the locker room. But their middle linebacker and best defensive player was suspended for that game, didn't make the trip that they lost the game to South Carolina. And, oh, by the way, they gave up 63 points. And there was a lot of conversation. Again, I don't know what happened, but there was a lot of conversation around tension, jealousy, problems surrounding NIL. And maybe the difference, maybe the difference between the way he was being treated relative to maybe some of the offensive players and these kinds of things, right? You brought up NIL a second ago and who can keep those kinds of things together. Like, this is really our first, I feels like really our first full run of some of these, they say Sheboy's making 7 figures. I don't think Oscar Sheboy will ever be a problem, but maybe somebody on the team gets jealous of what Oscar Sheboy's making, right? So, what are you hearing? I think there was Fran Fraschilla that had the tweet yesterday about that he's hearing the NIL stuff's already starting to pop up in locker rooms. What are you hearing about the way coaches are managing, and where do you think maybe college sports as a whole, but specifically basketball, is headed with NIL?
Well, I don't think from reading Fran's tweet that he's wrong. And I think those things have always been there, but they're there at such a different level now because, you never wanted to a lot of families are the ones that you can coach, you can be in the Hall of Fame, okay? And if your player has had a parent, a coach that they've listened to more than anything in their life, all right, you've got to work harder than you could possibly imagine to become that voice for that person. And you may never be the voice for that person. Yes, you may be the head coach. Yes, you may be the one doling out the playing time, but they never quite understand that, right? And I had an NBA assistant GM tell me one time when I was at Indiana, he said, tell so-and-so to quit looking in the stands every time at his dad because his dad isn't going to be anywhere near the court if he's in the NBA. Right. And it's like that level picks up everything. And I think what happens is in this day and age, right, like you're supposed to be limited as a coach into what you can do with the NIL. You're supposed to be limited in what you know maybe, but there's nobody that's doing that. I mean, people know. And so the bottom line is you've got to be able to manage that. And I think what you're going to see is there have been so many promises made. And that's the thing that I've heard already. Is that promises were made on money that aren't anywhere close to what people are going to get or what they have gotten. And that becomes another stressful point because people are hearing it. And that's why it's so wide open right now and so scary because, frankly, the cheating is not going to go away. And people say, well, no, everything's legal now. Well, no, it's not. It's not all legal. And it's not changing. And so really what happens is this. You've got to have such a strong relationship with your players, and it's got to be ongoing, it's got to be constant, and you've got to be able to read the situation. You've got to be able to read nonverbal. You've got to be able to read body language. You've got to be able to read those things and not just chalk them up to somebody having a bad day or a bad game, right? You've got to be able to read those constantly. And if your staff, the coaching staffs are the ones right now that are going to be cutting down the nets in their respective conferences or in March Madness, not just the coach. And you're only as good in this day and age as your staff. And if you don't have a staff that's connected, and I've lived some of the greatest connecting of staffs, and I've had some of the worst. And it's a night and day difference, as everybody knows. And I think that's going to be the thing. You're not going to be able to change everything, but you've got to be able to have an awareness of everything you possibly can, and then not be afraid to address it with your team. And I think that's easier said than done, and it's a daily process, and it's the old Bill Parcells line that on any given day there are going to be 5 unexpected things that are going to happen sometime in that day. And how you handle those 5 unexpected things is the definition of your leadership. And I think that's more than ever. It's always been that way in leadership.
I wonder as the season unfolds, we all know there's a kid that's going to pop on a team that maybe wasn't supposed to pop on a team, right? And then boom, right in the middle of the season, some car dealership or some this or some that hits him with a deal. And then the dude who's been the leading scorer all year maybe didn't get that deal, but this new guy's come in and grabbed some of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we can all foresee some of that stuff, and I think you hit it. Like, you're just going to have to address it, because if you allow it to fester, it could become a cancer. I mean.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt. And it doesn't matter right now in the world of collectives and boosters and things like that. Okay, you might be given 5,000, you might be given 10,000, and that 5,000 or 10,000 to you, okay, is the same as the 500,000 or million to Jimmy, right? You feel like you have the same leeway with that program, right? Because 5 and 10,000 in the collective for some programs is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So, right, if you get 10 guys that are giving that, or you organize 20 guys, that's running some programs. Well, 500,000 or a million, and you get a couple of those people, well, that's running other programs. I mean, the money I hear that with now even in football, that people are being promised to change jobs of what they're going to get in a collective. It's one of those things, man, I got to see it to believe it. But at the end of the day, there's got to be some truth to it, because it's just escalated at such a high point. So you're navigating so many things. It's more blue chips right now, okay, and Happy, you know, in the background, like Happy was with Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
It's more that than maybe it has ever been, because there's so many different people that and a lot of times in these. Now, if you've got a couple of billionaires inside your program, inside that are part of your booster group, man, you're rolling. But if you don't, and it's going to get even harder. And I think there's just so much the coach is navigating right now. And I think ultimately what's going to happen is it's going to affect middle management in a university, which is the athletic director's chair. And I think we're going to see that, because the athletic directors, they have so many hats they've got to wear. Well, they've got to raise funds for the athletic department, for the facilities. Well, now they've got to be involved in the collectives, and they're answering to so many different constituencies, right? The board of trustees, on many cases, they're more interested in what's going to happen with the educational process, and if we're going to get this engineering building built or the new business school built. And the coaches, well, we got to get a new locker room, or we got to get a new playing field, or we got to get a new stadium. But at the end of the day, the money that gets invested into the NIL is your daily living money to continue to recruit. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years.
It's a lot.
Hey, Tom, let me ask you this. I know you study a lot of coaches, leaders. You travel around the country. Your job now back with ESPN is like me. You get to see the behind-the-scenes workings of a lot of top-level players, coaches. You've coached first-round draft picks. You've coached Hall of Fame guys. What are, in your estimation, the common threads of the best? The best ones out there at what they do. What's the common thread?
Players and coaches?
Both.
Yep. I would say this. It starts with a level of empathy. When I look at all the best players that I have had, okay, even though they were different, all right, there were some common denominators. And empathy is one of those things. When I get around and get a chance to see coaches or spend time with them or observe them, you can tell there's a level of empathy. It may not be what the media picks up. It may not be what other coaches pick up. But there's an absolute level of care. I always say anybody can fake sympathy, okay? But you cannot fake empathy. You cannot fake it. You have it or you don't. And a lot of times people think their level of sympathy is empathy. It's not. All right, empathy goes way deeper, and it's something that you truly feel. And I think people have that. I think another thing that it goes hand in hand with the best is they really, really either love the work or they learn to love the work. And people don't always come in loving the work. Like Dwayne Wade didn't come in loving the work. Anthony Edwards didn't come in loving the work. Victor Oladipo came in loving the work. Mm-hmm. But eventually those guys learned to love the work. And I think once you learn to love it, now you take it the next step. And this is what I've seen in so many people. They don't miss the details. All right? They don't miss the details. I went to a New England Patriots practice one time. And they were in a joint practice with Tennessee, with the Houston Texans. Because Mike Vrabel was still with them then, and they were at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. And I've known Bill Belichick for a while, and we're standing there before practice, and he said, "Let's move over here. I don't want you to miss this. You got to watch Tom Brady warm up." He said he won't waste a rep, and whether it was footwork, whether it was jumping over bags on the plastic things on the field, to get his steps right, Whatever it was, he was right. I was at Tiger Stadium one time to see Tony La Russa, and Jim Leland was coaching the Tigers. And we started talking about leadership. He said, you know what my definition of leadership is? Watching Albert Pujols take batting practice. You know another definition of leadership? Watching Chris Carpenter warm up before a game. And it's like the great ones get energy from watching other great ones master their craft with the details and with that precision. And I could give numerous examples of that. I saw Michael Jordan practice one time in a walkthrough when he was with Doug Collins and the Washington Wizards near the end of his career. It was cold in the Bradley Center. I mean, the ice had been down the night before. You could see his breath. You could literally see Michael Jordan's breath as he's shooting before practice. I was there with my former coach. We counted 57 shots. He made 54 of those. 54, whether it was shooting drills or whether it was him shooting on his own. And every one of those misses, all right, he yelled out something. He was mad at that age at every one of his misses. Like, that's leadership to me.
Yep.
And I could go in with my own examples of my own players, but the level of detail. And then I think the other thing, they're not afraid to watch other people be great, right? They're not afraid for their assistants to be great. They're not afraid for their teammates to be great, which makes them great teammates. It may not always make them popular teammates, but it'll make them respected teammates. It may not always make them the teammate that they want to be around when they want to hear what they want to hear, but it'll make them the teammate that they want to be around and that they gravitate towards when they know they need something.
Yeah.
And I think those are the pulls. It's not easy for people to be great because you got to hold those around you to a different level of expectation and standard. But I think that's what makes people great. They surround themselves and see those examples. Like, I know every one of those examples I just gave you, I was way better off because I saw it. I was way better off. And that didn't have anything to do with anybody I coached. So
right.
The people that I've coached on a daily basis, I say this to my teams at Marquette, the one that went to the Final Four all the time. They taught me how to coach. Being with Ralph Willard, being with Tom Izzo, being with my coaches in high school, no question, they taught me how to coach and what it meant. But being with those players, they taught me what they needed, and it just makes you better. And I think that's the separator. I think it's a learning process, and the best of the best keep learning all the time. That's why they gravitate towards other great ones, because they know they're going to keep learning.
Along those lines, I'd love to hear you talk about Jim and John Harbaugh, and maybe the differences between those two, the similarities between those two, and how you've seen them embody what you just talked about, which was keep learning.
Well, we could do a 4-part podcast on those guys because I'm serious, because I could give so many examples, and I've seen them recently. And what they have, the similarities that they have, is they have an incredible pulse of their programs. They don't just have an incredible pulse of the offense or the defense or their coordinators. They have an incredible pulse of the program. They're engaged. And the two of them have incredible awareness. My wife, Joni, has that. I mean, there's a high level of awareness. There is a they know they have to be a part of a team. They know what it looks like when you feel like you're not a part of the team, when you're pulling away from the team, when you think you're above the team. They know what every one of those things, and in Jim's case, he's probably felt every one of those things. I'm not sure he's ever felt he's been above anybody on a team, but he's had to walk in the locker room after a game-winning touchdown pass on a Sunday or being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He's had to walk in the locker room with a new $4 million contract when he was playing, so he knows those things too. But they're both highly competitive. Jim, no matter what it is, he wants to win. John, probably 80%, but Jim, it's 110%. They want to win at it. But we were up in Ann Arbor a couple weeks ago for Thanksgiving, so we got to see them practice for the Ohio State game. And there's a level of confidence that Jim has always had that he permeates inside of his team. I mean, people forget he took over Stanford. I think they'd won 5 games in 3 years. You know, the Stanford that was there just completely changed. Jim goes to Stanford. He's recruiting to academics and to the name Jim Harbaugh. Now Stanford, over all these years, is recruited to be in a premier football program. But what he did, Dick Vermeil told my father-in-law, okay, that first year that they played USC and they had that upset win, that famous win at USC. He said USC, he told my father-in-law, USC has got 47 guys that are NFL prospects. Your son has none. And they win the game. Eventually he built that up. But Jim has always had, he's like a force field, right? And he makes you believe way beyond your capabilities, okay? And where John does the same thing, but John doesn't ever let you think, okay, that you're not good enough. And the moment that you get away from the team, John's got a unique way to pull you back in. And here's the other thing, guys, that I think separates those two. They are not afraid to coach their star players at all. At all. John, now, different tact and things like that, no question about it. But it's mind-boggling the number of pros that Jim has turned out from San Diego. I mean, Josh Johnson, who's with the 49ers now, okay, after Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt and he's backing up Brock Purdy right now. He coached Josh Johnson at the University of San Diego. Not Chris Mortensen, but Matt Mortensen, who he had before that, played in the NFL.
Could you give us?
It's just amazing.
You said they coach their stars, which I love because as somebody that was around stars, baseball's a little bit of a different culture from one thing I love about football is like everybody gets coached, but we know there's a level. Like I always love to see like back in the day with Brady and Josh McDaniel and him going at it, or Bill O'Brien and him going at it. Like they're coaching Tom Brady. Like and anyway, give me a Jim Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson coaching story if you got one. I would love to hear that.
Well, I think what John does
John
is he spends a lot of John spends a lot of time with Lamar. He spends a lot of time. He spends quality one-on-one time. I think what Lamar has got there, and Greg Roman and James Urban. Greg obviously is the offensive coordinator. James Urban is the quarterback coach. I was there a summer ago, and when they were practicing in South Carolina, okay? And I watched 2 days worth, just like I watched 2 days this past Thanksgiving with Ohio State with Jim. The connectedness of those teams. Like if you walk in and you don't really know the word culture, or you think it's an overused word. You walk out of there after 2 days, you got a pretty good idea of what culture is, right? Because culture can be one of the most overused and understood or misunderstood words out there, right? Well, they have it, all right? There's such a workmanlike area. Well, John coaches everybody, and I think because he coaches everybody, it makes it that much easier to coach a guy like Lamar. And so John knows how to get his messages to Lamar. He knows the messages that need to be given to him from the coaches. They communicate at such a high level. John never wastes a meal with sitting with somebody. He never wastes a walk by. I don't think John Harbaugh, again, I've never seen him do it. I don't think he walks by you with his head down and doesn't say hello or say a word. I just don't. Now, Jim might from time to time, but it's because he's so locked in and focused. But then Jim might stop and talk to you for 10 minutes, right? It's like there's neither one of them waste time connecting with the players off the football field. And I think that makes the connection on the football field that much more. But I think that John and Lamar have had numerous conversations behind the scenes that allow, especially in a year like this with the contract the way that it was, that allow that to never get in the way of how he coaches his best player. And I think the thing that both of them understand, and I think I've always understood this, but probably more so this year since I've gone to see my players play more in the NBA and gone to spend time with them, is you forget how young these guys are. I mean, Lamar Jackson, I think, is what, 25?
Yeah, younger than Stetson Bennett.
You got two quarterbacks. You had two quarterbacks. The Tennessee quarterback and the Georgia quarterback were 25, right? Like, I don't think those guys forget. And I think this is where I've tried to help them with coaching in college. You don't forget how young those guys are. You don't forget that, how easy it is to mask confidence, okay, because the world is putting you on this pedestal or these pressures that come in. I don't think those guys ever get away, or if they do get away from it, they get back to it real quick and understanding they're dealing with young men. But then I think in the case of like John coaching a Ray Lewis or Terrell Suggs, Bart Scott, Ed Reed, all those guys, Hall of Fame type of guys, I don't think he had any issue with that either. Because those guys understand that the program and what the program needs and the structure that the program needs can never override an individual's wants. And they have flexibility. I don't think these are going to ever be guys that you would think are not flexible. But they're not giving in to what wins. And I think that's why they're special coaches.
Tom, Coach Us Up, Coach Me Up podcast. We're taking notes, we're learning. Talk to us about when it doesn't go your way. You and I have had conversations about this in the past. It didn't end how you wanted it at Georgia. I've had things in my past that didn't end like I wanted to. Let's start digging into what does God tell us about that? What's our responsibility? What do you learn from that? How do you handle it for our listeners when it doesn't go your way in a certain area of your life? What stands out? What's important, Coach?
You got to fight every day to forgive. And the hardest forgiveness is yourself. And I think it's easier, and it's still really hard. It's still really, really hard. But I think it's easier to forgive others than it is to forgive yourself. And I think you got to work really, really hard at both. Because when you care, when you lock in, when you give, I mean, your waking moments, you go to sleep thinking about it, you wake up, you're thinking about it, and many 5 out of 7 nights a week, if you're lucky, it's only 5 out of 7, you wake up somewhere in the middle of the night or the early morning thinking about it, right before you should wake up. And so your life changes, and you just absolutely have got to pray for that forgiveness, that it starts with you. Because if you don't start with the forgiveness of yourself, it gets harder to make the forgiveness of others when you feel wronged, when you feel let down, when you feel lack of loyalty. It makes it so much harder to do that. And I think you always, and I pray for this myself, I pray for this for others, I prayed it for you, okay? I think the bottom line is we have to ask God constantly not to let anything take our spirit and not to let things create doubts. And I think when you're a parent, I think when you're a husband or a wife or people that are listening to this, when you have a responsibility of a family, it makes it clear that you have to do it. Doesn't make it easier, right? But it makes it clearer that you have to do it. Because I've preached for a long, long time, going back to Marquette, that I want 3 things to happen for those guys when they leave, okay? Number 1, I want them to be selfless. All right, I want them to, if they got to pull over to the side, and I used to do this before social media is what social media is now, but it was like if you got to pull over to the side of the road at 3 a.m. to help somebody change a tire, you don't need a camera crew to document it for you. Right? Like you're going to do what you have to do, right, to help people, to be selfless, right? That you're going to be a problem solver. That you're not just a person that understands the problem, that takes the problem and belabors the problem, but that you're a solver, right? The old adage that every great leader brings the people that are under them. Don't just bring me the problem, bring me the solution. Well, then you got to do it in your own life, right? So you got to be a problem solver. But ultimately, more than anything else, I wanted them to understand at some point in time they're going to be the spiritual leader of their home. They're going to be that, okay? And yes, you may have grown up with mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, whoever it was. Somebody was the spiritual leader of your home, okay? May not have been great leadership, but that was their role, right? And you hope in most cases, and in most cases it was, that it was really good leadership. Well, no matter what, at some point in time, that's going to be you. And I don't think you can preach that to your team if you can't understand that you have that at home, and you have that at home on its worst days. And you have to be able to do that. And I think praying to God that that spirit doesn't get taken away and that those doubts aren't there and that you can forgive. It doesn't mean you forget it. It doesn't mean you just drop it mentally and everything's great. But it's so easy to stay mad. It's so easy. And you just can't do it because it just beats you up. So that to me is the hardest. I worry the most when somebody's going through a hard time. I worry most about their spirit and their doubts because they can't ever move forward until they can move away from those. Because truly, until you can forgive the other person, you can't take the next step in your life.
No, you cannot.
But you're never going to forgive the other person if you can't forgive yourself.
Yeah, I had a pastor one time say that the measure to which we understand the grace that we've been given is the measure with which we will give it. And that's pretty deep to chew on.
Is that a Dave Stone? Is that a Dave Stone or Kyle Idleman?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because he was. I've never met Kyle, but I did know or do know Dave Stone.
That's great. So, yeah, those are.
Yeah, I've read.
Those are our two senior pastors at the church I attend, and
That's great. I've always wanted to go to that church.
Oh
at
yeah,
some point
please
I will.
let me know. I'd love to take you, but that concept of I'm a sinner who has only saved by grace, and so through that I'm capable of extending it. And as you said, head coach, even as a middle school coach, I need to give myself grace because I mess up a bunch, and I hate it. I hate it the most when I mess up, and if I can't give myself grace, then I'll be a lot less likely to give it to my players. Who do you lean on, or who have you leaned on? I'd love to, coach us up on who your mentors are when you're really scuffling in those areas, and then maybe coach us up as men who have people that lean into us and our listeners, I'm sure as well. Like how can we be that source of mentorship for somebody else in those kinds of tough times?
Sure. Well, I think, and I've really thought about this a lot in the last 9 months, right? Mike Tannenbaum, who's just a brilliant guy and runs the 33rd team now. He's on ESPN. He's been a general manager in the NBA or NFL. He told me back in 2017, I was in Miami with Jed Fish, who's now the coach at Arizona. We went in there for a couple days to study football and leadership, right, with Adam Gase and Chris Furster, and Mike was there, and Dom Capers was there, and Clyde Christensen. It was like a think tank to be around that, right? Well, I talked to Mike, and he said, you're going to put people in two buckets, and here are the buckets. He said, there are going to be people that were way better to you, okay, than you thought they would be, okay? And they're going to be people that you didn't hear from that you thought you would, right? And he really made a lot of sense, and I've thought about that a lot. And I think what happens is when you go through things, people mean well, but they move on, right? And it's the people that constantly, it's like you can't fake empathy. And I think you see that when you go through hard times and when you go through challenging times in your own life. And I would say for me, I have a group of friends, but ultimately at the end of the day, it comes down to my wife, Joni. It comes down to my family. It comes down to John. It comes down to Jim. It comes down to Joni's mom and dad, Jack and Jackie, who live next to Jim in Ann Arbor. And they're our friends, okay? And I'll give you a great example of somebody that's unbelievable, and he's gone through a tough year health-wise, and that's Tony La Russa. I got to know him in 2002, and still, he came in once last year. We were struggling, okay, during the season. We had just beaten Memphis, and he comes in on a Sunday. He's in Chicago from San Francisco. He's in Chicago for a White Sox meeting. He's going to go to Florida to hook up with Jim Leland. They're going to go see Felipe Alou, okay, for a day, and he's going to spend time with Jim Leland. He changes his trip to come through Atlanta, drives into Athens, spends the day with us, speaks to the team, watches practice, then gets on a plane and heads to Sarasota to see Jim. Like little things like that. Like he would have never, ever had to do that, right? So when I could turn around and do a favor for him this year, because he has an animal rescue foundation, and they run a big gala in Las Vegas. And he had a couple of people that canceled at the last minute to speak because of, one, because of a wife's illness. And so it was like he didn't, and he wasn't feeling well. Like I said, if you want me to drive to Las Vegas from Sarasota, Florida, I'll be there. I said, it's not even a question, right? And I had like 5 days notice. It's not even a question. So I go in there and speak, and then I end up being on a panel with Joe Torre, Dave Dombrowski, and Steve Stone as the MC. Like, whose bucket list was that on, right? Like, I didn't even have that on my bucket list, right? And it's like, that's God to me. Like, there's so many God moments that put you in these friendships, in these relationships. And what I've learned is it doesn't really, and this is the long answer, or the short answer to your question. It doesn't really matter who it is, because when God puts people with you at certain points in time to help you through that moment, I don't have a doubt in my mind that that's true. Mm-hmm. And I think he does the same with us. And then I think, to me, it's so, if I want to feel better, I'm going to listen to a Charles Stanley or a David Jeremiah sermon or podcast. I'm going to pick up a book. I just bought a new book on Pope Francis. It doesn't matter to me, right? If you can be in that, like, how are you going to feel worse if you read the Bible, or if you read God's word, or if you read something from a minister or from a pope? How are you going to feel worse? Yeah. Right? There's you got to really work at feeling worse if you read something or hear something like that. And so, like, that's it to me too. I get a ton of energy from studying film and maybe seeing different teams practice and play and things like that. But I get the same amount of energy from listening to a Charles Stanley podcast for 20 minutes on a run, right?
I've learned this recently, and I've actually tweeted a few times. Scroll through social media for 10 minutes, see how you feel, put your phone down, and then read God's word for 10 minutes. And you tell me which uplifted you, which freed you up, which gave you peace, which gave you clarity, which gave you truth in your life, which voice was louder and had more impact, more lasting impact. That is so true in my own life. I'm telling you, in my own life.
I'll tell you something that I think this will help the listeners. And this pastor is a friend of Dave Stone's. It's actually how I met him. But his name is Tom Ellsworth, and he had a church. He retired. He had a church, Sherwood Oaks, in Bloomington, Indiana. Probably 4,000 plus parishioners, right? And so he would come in and do a Bible study with us since January of 2009. In a 52-week year, he probably came in 48 of those weeks. And for some of my staff, that was the only time. Like, I had coaches that called it church. Mm-hmm. We've got church at 10:30 on Wednesday, right? Yeah. Like, that hit me, because that was church to them, right? Yeah. Which was great, right? And we'd have other coaches from other sports come. The ladies' coaches would come all the time. That Tracy Smith might come. We had people of different denominations come. We had a Jewish coach come. He'd come, right? Like, he just got – it was such a great experience. Well, anyways, 2015, I guess it is, we got a player that's going to transfer, and he's going to go back home, and there's family issues, and we start talking, and I really don't want him to leave, but I accept that he's gonna, and we get near the end, and he starts talking to me about God, because his only time in church was Christmas, right? And so I didn't care if I was going to get fired for praying, if I was going to get fired for loving God, for talking about God at one of the schools I was at, well, so be it, right? Like, I can live with that, right? I could live with that, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, it's praying for players, somebody gets injured. That was like, I never thought twice about that, right? So we're sitting in there, and he'd been a part of it in there that year, and he started asking me all these questions about God and God being real and the Bible, and he didn't even own a Bible, right? And that tore me up. Like, it tore me up. He was leaving, but it tore me up. And I talked to our pastor about it one day, and, like, I was in tears. Like, I said, this is killing me. I don't want him to go, because I feel like this is deeper than this. And he said, first off, remember this, as a coach, and I think it's important for every coach to understand this, you'll have a platform that's greater than any platform I'll ever have as a minister. He said, because there's so many people that you don't know that are looking to see what you're doing. But you have to understand this. He said, as a coach, okay, we're all in a position from God where we plant seeds for other people. We don't know what seeds have been planted before us, and we don't know who's going to take care of those seeds that we planted. But as long as you continue to plant seeds and trust God, he's going to take care of that. Okay? It's when we ignore the seeds, or when we ignore the planting, or when we don't continue to cultivate it, is when the problem comes. And he said, you don't have to worry about that. You just need to pray that those seeds continue to be grown. And that helped me so much, right? Like, it helped me, like, no matter what you're doing, you're picking up from where somebody left off, or you're starting something anew and somebody else is going to take it. I think about that all the time when guys go on to the NBA or they go on to play in Europe or they go on into their lives. Like, we better have done a good job, okay, in everything that we do to do what we could do, right? And then you never stop being their coach, right? Like you're not going to be their present-day coach, but for only so long a period of time. But you never stop loving them as a coach, and therefore you never stop telling them what they need to hear to be successful, to be great. Yeah. It might be a guy's not getting his hand through the ball on a follow-through. It might be a guy's not stepping in. It might be a guy's not treating his family the way it needs to be treated. But whatever it is, if you love them, you can't be afraid to tell them, whether they want to hear it or not.
You talk about grace, Jim. Sometimes we need to give ourselves grace because we think we can save everybody, or whatever that saving is that we're talking about. But I love the reference Coach made to 1 Corinthians 3:6-7 says, Paul's talking. He said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow, right? We have to remove ourselves from the end result and just be faithful to what we've been called to do, which is plant seeds, love people, try to set a good example. But we start taking the credit for when the seed grows, and then we're putting ourselves in the place that only God sits at, So I just think that's always a good reminder for all of those who want to be salt and light. Be salt and light, but you're not really responsible for, even with our children. I have to remind myself that with my kids. Like, they're not robots. I can't make them do anything. I mean, sometimes I can, but you know what I mean, as far as their heart issues, right? So
Right. Yeah.
1 Corinthians 3:6-7.
Okay. No, that's interesting you say that, because Dr. Stanley, Reverend Stanley, in the podcast yesterday is talking about you can do all the service you want for the Lord and still not have your heart in the right place, right? Because then you start thinking more about the service and how it serves you, all right, rather than how it serves God. And it's just amazing. There's so many different things, and I think when you think like that, it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. You're going to make plenty, right? And my guilt so many times is misreading of people, misreading of situations, misreading of hiring a coach, and it takes time to overcome that, misreading landscapes or making the wrong decision, and then it affects everybody. And you just got to continue to go back to God is going to protect you, right?
Yes.
And he's going to put things and people around you that are going to help you. And that's why it's been so fascinating listening to people talk about Grant Wall. I've known Grant 25 years, haven't seen him in a long time, but knew him 25 years, and listening to people talk about him. All right, and then to read all the people with Mike Leach, and just those two. I don't know if they ever met. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But those two, you get over the last span of a couple of days. Okay, when you read all the different things, those two made people feel better about themselves, right? Than maybe they possibly could have ever imagined. My wife said that about Al McGuire, and we've got a year and a half with Al McGuire that we were at Marquette. And you talk about somebody that was bigger than life to me when I got there. He broke that down. The first day we spent together was 7 hours. By hour number 2, I felt like I was with a friend, right? And so he knows he's going to pass away. It's the day after Christmas, December 26th. He has an event at his house, or his son's house, Allie's house, and invites all his close friends, right? And it's almost like a going-away party. And it's it's a Christmas party, but like you knew what you were there for, right? And he was phenomenal. I mean, he was absolutely phenomenal. It was in the process of we were going to build a building, and they wanted to put his name on it, and he pulls myself, one of his former players, the AD, and another man into a room and said, "This is what I want, and you better take care of Tom." He said, "You better take care of Tom." He tells somebody else, "All right, you better take care of Tom." Like, he just made it so strong for me. Well, he sees all these people. We're driving home, and my wife says, "I've never seen that before." So what's that? He said, he made everybody feel better about themselves, and we went there to make him feel better about him. And he passed away a little over a month later. Maybe it was just about a month. He passed away, and it was like that hit me like, what kind of trait is that? When things are going really wrong, and you can make people feel better than they ever came to make you feel, we should all aspire to that.
Mm-hmm. Tommy, I'll be respectful of our time. The last thing I want to ask you, give me a Bible story that has really impacted you in the past or impacts you right now. What can we learn from one?
Well, I would say, verse-wise, one that I've been saying since I was an assistant at Mount Pleasant High School during the national anthem, and since I've said little kid, Proverbs 16:3. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. Straight out of the King James Version. Yep. Okay, no new translation. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. And I've prayed that constantly. But I would think the one, and I've used this with teams, and I remember when I used it with my team that was number one in the country at Indiana, was the parable of the sower. And we did that on a Thursday, and put they thought we were coming in to watch film, and we didn't. It was all, had somebody type it all out. There were the verses all right there. And we went through the parable of the sower with the team. And that Sunday we went to Ohio State and won on the road where we hadn't won, right? We won on the road. And one thing I did that morning is, because I had so many guys that went to church, a kid like Victor Oladipo, when he was with us, he was either going to go, and he was Catholic, so he was either going to go to the early morning mass or the late night mass. He wasn't missing it. In fact, that night we come back from Ohio State, he's at the 9 o'clock mass. But the parable of the sower, I think, resonated with even the guys that didn't know it. And I think God gave me the words on how to express that and how it fit a team. And then, rather than watching film before the Ohio State game that morning, we had the minister I mentioned, Tom Ellsworth, do a sermon just for them. It's about a 12, 13-minute sermon. And he recorded it, and we showed that on a Sunday morning, okay? Because I was never bringing my team in for walkthrough and things like that unless it absolutely had to be, on a Sunday for a Sunday game. Obviously, we have Sunday games, but I was always trying to work around that. And I said, you know what? We're going to have church here for these guys this morning. And then we watched a little bit of film, but we won the game. But it was like, to me, that made all the difference in the world. Like the parable of the sower. Where are you planting the seed, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that I would say, when you ask that question, that hits me the most. And it's probably, I got a lot of favorites, but I think that's the favorite. And I look at verses now, like, how does that apply to so many different areas of life?
Yeah.
And you don't have to look very far into that Bible to find things that affect your team, but there are some that maybe affect it more than others. And I don't think any coach should ever be afraid to invoke the greatest history of this world that they could possibly have. We got a lot of people that want to teach history and stuff like that to their team, which is great. I've done the same thing. But when you can teach something that applies to them that they're probably not going to forget the rest of their life, that's way more important.
Yeah, man, well done. Well done, Tom. Thanks for your time. You're like me, middle of college basketball, man. You're going 100 miles an hour. But
well, I was honored to be asked to do this. I think what you guys, it really was. It was an honor, because I think what you're doing. And who was your first guest?
Reese Davis.
Barnes?
Reese Davis.
Reese Davis. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just to see what you're doing, and just amazing to me. And I think what people get from this is they get encouragement, they get reinforcement, they get advisement, but you're helping people build far more qualities into their life that have a lot more to do than just how to win the game based on whatever sport it is, whatever is it a hit and run? Is it a clear out play? Is it a flea flicker? Whatever it is, there's so many more ways to reach somebody so that those moments work out even better. And I think what you're doing is giving life lessons to people that are going to apply them. And you're planting seeds with people that you'll probably never even meet, okay? But you're planting seeds with people that are helping them plant so many more, and I think it's incredible. So thank you for having me.
All right, man. Thank you. Well done. Tom Crean, our guest today. Coach, we thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon about basketball.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks again for joining us.